Hello, my name is Bill Johnson, and what I'd like to do today is talk about a book called Real Therapy by Dr. Gary Solomon that I find of value both to writers and of value to people personally. The concept that Gary Solomon explores in this book is that movies can be therapeutic, that people can watch them for insights into their life situations, problems. I did therapy with Dr. Solomon, and so I'm going to talk about some of the movies he asked me to watch and how that helped me, and a little bit about my background. Before I got into therapy, I was kind of the white knight that, if I had a friend in trouble, I'd ride in on the white horse and take care of things. I helped a lot of women, fixing batteries, changing alternators, working on brakes. So I was kind of like I said, the guy that took care of things. The problem with that is that meant I was kind of on the lookout for people that needed help. And when I would get into relationships with someone that needed help, I wasn't aware that the dynamic that I had set up for myself was I needed the other person to be in trouble so I could feel good about myself. So at the time I was in a relationship when I was seeing Dr. Solomon, and he asked me to watch a movie called When a Man Loves a Woman with Meg Ryan and Andy Garcia. And at the time, I could not grasp the concept of why my girlfriend at the time was angry at me for helping her. I just could not get it. And so when I watched the movie When a Man Loves a Woman, Meg Ryan is someone that drinks, and it's very exciting, and because Andy Garcia is kind of this quiet guy. But when they get married, the drinking that fuels this fun becomes deadly. I mean, she, drunk, leaps out of a boat, almost drowns. And so eventually she ends up trying to get in recovery, and she ends up at a retreat, whatever you want to call it, where people would go for help. And when she comes back, she has a couple kids, and it's breakfast time, and the kids are squabbling, and she's dealing with it. And Andy Garcia's character comes down the stairs, and basically he announces, the sober, healthy adult is here now, so if the recovering alcoholic would step aside, I'll take over now, and I'll deal with this. And when I watched that movie for the first time, I understood what I was doing in relationships, why someone would be angry at me for not letting them have their own life, deal with their own stuff. And therapy was not an easy process for me, and one of the reasons I'm recommending this book is it's many people in the world cannot afford therapy, and I believe a book like this can help give them therapeutic insights that possibly they can't afford, or many people can't afford. So, as I was going through this therapeutic process with Gary Solomon, Dr. Gary Solomon, I kind of had this litmus test for, how rough the session was. So when I had this realization of what I was doing to the people I was in relationships with, the women, after I left the session, I would go to the store and I'd buy a family-sized bag of cheddar-flavored potato chips. I mean, like a big, huge bag. And I'd buy some sour cream, and I would eat the whole thing. So that was always my litmus test to, how deeply I uncovered some wound and had to deal with it. Another movie that Dr. Solomon recommended for me was Drop Dead Fred. And in that movie, there's a young woman, boyfriend leaves her, loses her job, and she ends up having to move back into with her mother. And her mother's always been very domineering, and just so when this young woman was a little girl, she had an imaginary friend called Drop Dead Fred. And so the dynamic here was what Drop Dead Fred would do was he would act out her anger. Like when she was a little girl, it wasn't her that smeared dog excrement on the snow white carpet. It was Drop Dead Fred. I couldn't stand watching this film because I was one of these people that had buried my anger. I mean, to most people, I was the mellow, kind, calm, good guy. But there was stuff down there, and of course, Dr. Solomon could see that it was like bubbling up in different ways. So when I watched this movie, it helped me to lance some of those festering wounds, at least become consciously aware of what I was doing in my life and how that had impacted me, and also how it looked to other people. And that brings me to a third film that he had me watch. It was called The Men's Club. And when I was young, I'd be one of these people that would have a really odd, esoteric answering machine message. And friends would come up to me and say, Bill, do you understand that this message you've left on your answering machine is completely incomprehensible to someone that doesn't know you? I mean, they're going to think you're very strange. I was also the person that would, go into a group of people I didn't know and start talking about ghost stories. I would just make really bizarre esoteric remarks that I thought were just hilariously funny. And so in this movie, Men's Club, there is a character in the background who the whole movie is throwing out these kind of esoteric remarks that he thinks are very humorous. And none of the people around him have a clue what he's talking about. And when I watched that film, I could see what I looked like to other people in a way that, without watching that film, I could not. And so I dropped the, bizarre, esoteric answering machine messages. And now before I tell bizarre, esoteric stories to strangers, I say, hello, my name's Bill first. So now there are many issues and many movies that he breaks down in this book, about alcoholism, abandonment, family issues. There are movies that he talks about where adult children go home for Christmas, which is something in my life that I have to deal with, where, we're all in our 40s and 50s and we all revert to our childhood roles when we go home. So I really recommend this book for people that, like I said, cannot afford therapy, but could use some insights into what's going on in their life. Now, I do have one other thing I want to mention in this book is Dr. Solomon reviewed Harvey, and he insisted in the book that Harvey was an imaginary rabbit, and I insisted correctly that Harvey was an invisible rabbit. And I think all right-minded, sane people who watch the movie will agree with me that Harvey was not imaginary, he was invisible. So at any rate, and you see how I kind of left the bizarre esoteric story for the end of this video. And Dr. Solomon also has a few other books, and I just recommend this book for people who are struggling in pain, and will find that movies offer them an opportunity to look at their behavior in a way that they won't necessarily block or not hear. And one other little story about my sessions with Dr. Solomon. He taped our sessions, so I would have a tape. We would reuse the tape, but occasionally I'd forget to bring a tape, so we'd do a new one. So there was always a few tapes that I had around. There was one session where he said something to me where I shut down so quickly. I knew that he'd said something, but I didn't know what the words he said were. And what was interesting was I went back later and listened to that tape play. And as soon as he said those words again, I again shut down immediately, and I was aware that he'd said something. But I still don't know what he said. So, I think for many people, the therapeutic process, counseling can help me kind of work through some deeper issues that maybe we come out of childhood with, or, maybe you find yourself marrying alcoholics or other dysfunctional relationships. I just think this book is a good resource. Thanks.